Hi everyone. Today I am going to be talking about The Citadel of Forgotten Myths by Michael Moorcock, which is part of the Elric Saga. I apologize if you can hear any strange noises. One of my neighbors is having building work done on their house, so you might hear that in the background. This is quite exciting for me. This is the first brand new Elric novel released, I think, since 2005. I say brand new Elric novel, but part of this book has actually been released before. I'll get into that. Let's have a look at the book itself first. This is the Saga Press edition, just like the Elric Saga volumes. This is just the regular standard edition. There is a collector's edition, and I don't have that. The dust jacket has this very nice picture of Elric on the cover. I don't know who has illustrated the front cover. The book itself is just black. Here's the spine. The end papers are that same map that are found in the Elric Saga volumes of the Young Kingdoms. Again, not entirely appropriate for this edition, although this one does take place in Elric's world, unlike Volume 3. It doesn't take place anywhere on this map. It's in a completely new part of Elric's world, which we have not seen before in the Elric Saga, but I'll get into that. This one is completely unillustrated, no illustrations or anything, which is a shame. Here is the binding. Okay, so I say this is the first brand new Elric story, Elric novel since 2005, but two parts of this have actually been released before. So as you can see, it is in 3 books. Books 1 and 2 have both been published before in other formats. Book 2 was published first, which was called Black Petals, and that was published in Weird Tales magazine. It actually says at the back when they were published. Here we go. So as you can see, in Weird Tales magazine number 349 in 2008, and the first part was published as Crimson Pearls in Swords and Dark Magic, the New Sword and Sorcery in 2010. I actually happen to have a copy of Weird Tales that has that story in. So I was actually able to compare the... it's not in the best condition. I've had it for a while, and I don't always look after my things very well. So the cover has actually come off, which is a shame. But it has got black petals in here. Somewhere. There we go. Which is illustrated. So I've read the second part of this book before, sort of. He has revised it and edited to make it fit the overall story that he is telling in this novel. People's names have changed. The placement in the timeline has changed. And also the location has changed as well. So we'll get into that. So the advertising for this book was very weird. They advertised it as fitting in between the second and last book of the saga, which isn't very clear, because does that mean the second and last book in the original Elric Saga, so between Bane of the Black Sword and Stormbringer, or does it mean the second and last book in the Saga Press volumes, Volume 2, Volume 3? Well, I can kind of answer that neither of those is even correct. It takes place in the middle of the Bane of the Black Sword, right after Kings in Darkness and before the Flamebringers. So if you want to read the entire Elric Saga in order, and you're reading the Saga Press editions, when you get to the end of Kings in Darkness, before starting the Flamebringers, you can read this novel set in between those two stories. I find that a bit of an odd choice, personally, mostly because the gap between Kings in Darkness and Flamebringers, it's insubstantial. It's a bit of a nothing. You can read those two stories back to back, and it feels like they completely flow on one into the other. Elric meets his new bride to be in Kings in Darkness, and in the Flamebringers they get married. They're married, so it's there's no real gap there to fill in. But Michael Moorcock has decided to have a whole load of adventures for Elric and Moonglum in between those two stories. It doesn't not work. It does work. It's just there are so much bigger gaps in the earlier part of the saga where it's alluded that Elric had these huge adventures and things happened to him, which could use filling in and never have been, and might now never will be, because he has said that this is probably his last one. So I just find that an odd choice. So that being said, this, particularly the first two parts, is a complete return to form for Elric. For that classic sword and sorcery feel. These feel like classic Elric stories. They feel like early Elric stories. Elric and Moonglum on an adventure, meeting strange creatures, fighting chaos, having sword and sorcery adventures, Elric being moody and morose and upset that he has to rely so much on his soul-stealing sword, trying to figure out a way to get rid, those classic things which are in those early Elric stories, and it really did feel like they were right out of the 60s. Then you get to the third part, and we are much more into the later territory, the books that were written later in the saga. So we're talking more like the Fortress of the Pearl, the Revenge of the Rose, those slower burn stories, which were more philosophical, more going into the characters of Elric and what it means to be an avatar of the Eternal Champion and the multiverse and lore and chaos, and those questions that Elric asks and that he asks himself and all those things. So you get a much slower story, a lot more dialogue, a lot more talking, and some people don't like those as much as the faster paced sword and sorcery adventures, which the first two parts have. I like them. It does feel a bit jarring, though, to suddenly go into these sort of very action-heavy, very fast-paced adventure stories, and then to suddenly get this sort of slow down at the end of the story. So it feels a little bit jarring. It's still enjoyable. There's still a lot of action in that story. There always is in an Elric story. What is nice is that we're back to Elric's sword and sorcery setting for all three books in this. Whereas the volume 3 of the Saga Press editions contained the last 3 Elric books, which were, I would argue, not really Elric books, even though Elric is the prominent character in them. They were set in a version of our world in the 1930s or 1940s, fighting Nazis, traveling through the multiverse. It was told in the first person by other characters. As I said, more Von Beck stories. This is an Elric story. It fits right in that original saga. It feels part of it. There are some contradictions and some retconning going on. That doesn't really matter. It really fits. The main story of this is that Elric is once again trying to find out more about the origins of his people and himself, and ways to get rid of Stormbringer, the soul-sucking sword, which is the bane of his existence, but that he can't live without. So he travels to the underside of his world, which turns out they had always thought was flat. It is not flat. It is described in the book as egg-shaped. And they then travel to the world below, which the people there call the world above, and they call Elric's world the world below. It's interesting. They say egg-shaped, and yet they like flipping to the underside. So I'm personally having trouble picturing what that means in my head, what egg-shaped means and why it has an underside. And why isn't egg-shaped just round or oval even? Um, um, so it's a bit of a strange concept, but it works. We get to visit new places that we've not been to before. We leave the young kingdoms behind. You see new peoples, other races that are related to the Melnibonians, and have adventures there. And it's a fun, interesting story. Not a absolute must read, I must say. You get a lot more out of it if you've read the other Elric stories. I've seen a few reviews online from people where this was their first Elric story, and it has not really worked for them. I would say that yeah, I would say this is mostly seems to be aimed at people who know the character and want to see more of him rather than a jumping on point. Um, I really enjoyed this book. I would read it again after some time has passed. And again, if you want to read it all in order, the best place to place it would be in between Kings in Darkness and the Flamebringers, right in the middle of the Bane of the Black Sword. And then you can continue and read Stormbringer. There are a few little bit of contradictions. He meets Xianbarg, the Queen of Swords, in this book. Sorry, there's a lot of spoilers in my reviews. I hope you're all used to that by now. Which, of course, he then meets again in Stormbringer, which was written much, much, much earlier, but is obviously set last in the chronology. And the way they act in Stormbringer, it's as though it's the first time he meets Xianbarg. This isn't the first time that sort of thing has happened in the Elric Saga because they weren't written in order. Sometimes there are these little contradictions. Michael Moorcock has gone back and revised all of his stories again and again and again, and these latest editions are no different. He has changed some names, he has changed some terminology. He's trying to make it all fit as much as possible. When a lot of these stories were written, dragons were just referred to as dragons. Now you can read them and they're still called dragons, but they're also, he refers to the Fuan a lot more, which is their Melnibonian name. So these little things which just tie up the continuity and make it tighter, just to make everything sort of fit a little bit better, which I don't really mind. So there we have the entire saga of Elric, all published by Saga Press. Such in these lovely matching editions. They all match, including this newest one. They all go together. They all would look very, very nice on a shelf together. I'm not a huge fan of the spines on the dust jackets, to tell the truth. They seem a little bit generic and plain to me. But, and these lovely artwork, some of which have appeared before. But yeah, we have the whole of the Elric Saga in one place, except that we don't. Because there are still some Elric stories missing from here. Even it's advertised as being the whole thing, but there are still some missing. And if you read the backs of these books, which go through all the different Elric things published, you can see there are some missing. And I know that there are a whole lot written by not Michael Moorcock, but I'm specifically talking about Michael Moorcock's Elric stories. So, for example, we don't have The Making of the Sorcerer. That's because that is a comic book. But it is canon, and it is referenced several times, particularly in this newest one. It references it a lot. That is the prequel to the first book, Elric of Melniboné, whilst he is still training to be a sorcerer on the dream couches of Imbria. And how the rivalry with his cousin starts and that sort of thing. When that's not found in any of these, it'd be difficult to put it in these because it is a comic. We also have Elric at the End of Time is an Elric adventure. I'm not entirely sure where you'd fit it in his timeline. He travels to the end of time and he then encounters the denizens at the end of time, which is, of course, from the book The Dancers at the End of Time, and also the short story collection The Legends at the End of Time, which is another great Michael Moorcock series. Very, very funny series, much more farcical comedy series. and it's Elric's encounters with that. That story is not in any of these, which I think is a shame. That's still part of the Elric Saga. It's a lot more whimsical and stuff, but it's still part of that. And also, there is also an Elric story, an Elric chapter in the second Ether trilogy, which Michael Moorcock wrote, and that's not in these either. Admittedly, that is a chapter of a much larger story as well, so it'd be very difficult to fit that in here. But you do have the vast majority of the Elric books here in these volumes, in these great volumes for Saga Press. I'm really happy I got them. I still think some of them could have been done better. These being advertised as illustrated, I still think was a little bit misleading. But overall, I'm very happy with these. I'm glad to have them on my shelf. These nice, and whenever I want to read the Elric Saga in order from beginning to end, chronological order from beginning to end, I can do so with these volumes. I can read the whole of number 1, most of volume 2, right up until the end of Bane of the Black Sword, then read Forgotten Myths, go back to Bane of the Black Sword, and finish off with Stormbringer. And it feels like you have read the whole of Elric's adventures from beginning when he is Emperor in Melnibone up until the very end, where he, spoiler, causes the destruction of his world and ushers in the beginning of our world. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, leave us a like. If you want to see more of this kind of thing, then subscribe. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.